Welcome to the Playground, a story of magic and technology that threatens Runeterra and the people residing there. Based on the popular online game League of Legends, Netflix and Riot Games teamed up to create Arcane. The show has been praised for its animation, world building, complex characters and storytelling. It became one of the most universally acclaimed shows of 2021. And it was a real breakthrough for video game adaptations since many in the past have failed miserably. Since the release of Arcane's first season, the show has received nothing but high praise. But for me, on the other hand, being the salty person I am, I wanted to share my opinion on this show because I don't actually think it's as good as people say it is. One might say it's mid? Okay, maybe not that far, I apologise. Now, I haven't played the game League of Legends, so I knew nothing about the world or its characters. I am completely blind and neutral going into this. The first act invites you into an epic world full of dense and dazzling visuals. We are introduced to our main characters, Vi and Powder, who find their parents dead in the midst of a failed rebellion. The leader of this rebellion, Vander, takes the two into his unofficial custody. This scene worked really well because it didn't rely on any dialogue. The visuals and the music both played off each other really effectively to create an emotional moment of tragedy. A few years later, Vi and Powder pull a robbery in the rich and wealthy city of Piltover, along with their two adopted brothers, Milo and Clagor. They find themselves in a spot of bother when things quickly turn south for them. This whole sequence feels fast and energetic, and that was down to the stunning animation by Forteach Productions. What I like about the heist was the way it portrayed the characters' mannerisms. For instance, we saw that Powder was constantly discouraged by Milo, which would plant a seed of doubt in Powder's mind that Vi would begin to lose faith in her ability. The way they illustrate the heist smartly attaches the societal structure of the two cities. There was a Robin Hood feel to this sequence that gave you a pretty good understanding that this was going to be a story of the repressed and the oppressors. After losing all their loot from the violent encounter with Deckard and his thugs, Powder manages to salvage the stolen magical crystals. What worked well in this episode is the way the magical elements intrigued my curiosity of this world, which is a good sign of saying I'm not bored. Vander was the standout character for me in this show. The scene in the last drop told you everything you need to know about him. His intervention in Huck's business with two shady characters called Jules and Vern were extremely composed. It let you know that this man had a long and grueling history of violence. He had a domineering presence about him, but also a sense of kindness and guardianship. We got a good understanding of the danger that was evidently simmering from the result of the Piltover heist. The pilot of Arcane was a near-perfect example of how to engage an audience in the story without wasting any time. So many times I find myself waiting for a show to find some momentum until the 5th or 6th episode, but with Arcane, the spark ignited from the very beginning. I really enjoyed the dynamic between Vi and Vander. It was an ideological battle of youth and adulthood. The Enforcers arrive and make things even more interesting when we see that Grayson and Vander have this kind of corrupt deal, but there's also a level of respect here. We see once more that age is an important asset of wisdom, as Enforcer Grayson is trying to keep peace and control the situation, whereas the young Enforcer Marcus is hot-headed and not afraid to use violence as an answer, just like Vi. Anyway, Grayson just needs a name to know who was responsible for the cause of the explosion in Piltover. First of all, the Enforcers who were chasing them clearly saw that the leader was a girl with pink hair. There can't be many people with natural pink hair, or at least from what I've seen so far. Vander knows he can't give up his adopted children to the Enforcers, but Grayson does not question him further and just goes, "Oh well, if you change your mind." There should have been a little more tension in this scene that would make Vander more anxious here. That's all I'm saying. I'll admit, the first 20 minutes of this episode was a lot more brighter and entertaining. As it progressed to the end, it became less interesting. Most notably, the introduction of Crime Lord Silco. It was as if I'd seen this all before. Mysterious voice, evil lab, and of course there's a cat. I felt that this displayed the antagonist in a very cliched way. Some mysteries are better left unsolved introduces us to the protagonists of Piltover. We are shown what happens from Jace's perspective of the heist, from which he is knocked out of unconsciousness. Jace's flashback of his childhood is a marvellous splendour, showcasing the potential of just how epic the magic in this world can be. So Jace is found guilty of possessing illegal items in the penthouse and must answer to the council to decide his fate. The council consists of a bunch of righteous, condescending and clueless characters who more or less think alike and don't really offer much apart from their appearance. Only Mel Madada seemed to have a motive, but even so it doesn't seem necessary to add her as a supporting character when her goals aren't nearly as engaging as the rest. At this point of Arcane, the storyline begins to expand. There are many transitions from the city of Piltover to Zorn, which means the plot becomes more complex from here on. But that doesn't mean it's going to be good. In all the best shows and films I've seen that have a ton of characters, the story starts with all of them together and they separate as the story progresses. Look at Lord of the Rings. All the main characters are part of the Fellowship. As the story progresses into the next film, they become separated. This made us more invested in all of the characters because we wanted to see the characters succeed and reunite after such a perilous journey. Game of Thrones also had this similar structure if you include the storyline in Westeros. I felt that the addition of Jace's storyline just overflooded the overall narrative in episodes 2 and 3 of the first act. Whenever a scene would grow into excitement, they would cut to another storyline, which was very frustrating. I know that this is based on a game full of many characters, and the writers have done a commendable job in incorporating as many characters as possible with depth and emotion. Yet, it felt that the story should have focused on Vi and Powder and their struggles in the underground city. More could have been explored here, and we could have gotten a better understanding of the sisters' relationship, making it more impactful and emotional for the climax of episode 3. I did have a slight problem with the dialogue at times. It was to the point and always never drifted, but I felt that this whole rich versus poor scenario was all too familiar when encrusted with the monologues and conversations. The scene in which Marcus attempts to intimidate Vander at the last drop to give up his 4 children, well, his speech towards the bad guys just seemed like I'd seen this in other movies 1,000 times.
You people down here are all the same.
What do you mean, you people?
You think you're standing up for something?
Hell yeah, I do.
Silco still remained a pretty cliched villain. I never felt that he was threatening at all, and that's because of the way they've drawn his appearance, and the environment that he surrounds himself in is no different to something like a Disney villain. The real issue was expansion of different storylines, because I felt that the heart and soul was diminishing since there was so much going on. It didn't become convoluted, but my attention span lost interest because not enough emotional drive was being injected into the scenes. Vi and Powder have just one scene, and that's just Vi telling Powder what makes her different, makes her stronger, and then dashes. We don't get to spend any time with them. Instead, we just get some Sun Tzu quotes. This problem doesn't just come from the multiple storylines, but also the pacing, which I mentioned previously and I'll mention again. 40 minutes doesn't work. I feel that the show's action-packed energy in the pilot numbed my boredom. But in the following episodes, the running time would have felt smooth and polished if cut down to 25 minutes. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, but then we don't get enough time to flesh the characters in just 9 episodes. Well, you don't need to have 9 episodes. It could have been increased to 18 episodes with each lasting 25 minutes. Now, the slow motion action didn't work for me. It seemed corny and over the top, and just seemed to be used for a stylistic purpose, but there's no emotional response in these shots. As the story progresses, I realise that I'm no longer as invested in the characters as I was in the pilot, which for me still remains the strongest episode of the show. The sequence at the cannery is great to watch. The animation is the real star of this show. We got a little bit of backstory with Vander and Silco, which needed more time to explore, and it made Silco's character a lot more captivating. Powder's change to becoming bad seemed a little forced, and that was because there wasn't enough scenes involving her and Vi. The second act takes place a number of years after the events of the first. I saw no reason why this needed to happen after just 3 episodes. If the show was to just conclude after all 9 episodes without a second season in the works, then I wouldn't be so fussed. Anyway, having successfully created magic through science, Jace's inventions, such as the Hex Gates, have revolutionized the City of Progress. So an airship is hijacked by a bunch of masked thugs flying on hoverboards. I was very confused watching this at first since I didn't know what was going on. Once they revealed Vi and a much older Powder, now going by the name of Jinx, were involved, my slow brain gradually processed what was going on. However, this conflict between the 2 sisters just didn't have a strong impact on me since the first act didn't spend enough time on their dynamic. We see that Jinx is now very unstable and dangerous, which made her character the most fascinating in the show. Jace and Victor show Heimerdinger their new inventions, to which he suggests that they need another decade of research before being released to the public. This causes some friction with Victor. His voice and appearance gave off a really mysterious vibe to his persona. We see that Silco and Jinx have formed this twisted father-daughter relationship which could have been detailed more extensively, because that kind of relationship can be quite chaotic when presented in a deeper way that really reflects their desires. What we needed was a scene to show that the two depended on each other. They certainly trusted each other the most, as we saw when Saviko's attempts to influence Silco's bond with Jinx. But we needed more than that. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but there really could have been time since each episode is 40 minutes long. But then again, it doesn't help when you have other characters to fill in that time who no one cares about as much. Caitlyn has a more crucial role in the second act. Now I must emphasize I haven't played the game, so my knowledge of these characters only come from the show. Her presence is not exactly captivating. She's playing the good-hearted enforcer to oppose the corrupt Marcus, but having that good nature is what makes her dull. I don't care if she succeeds, because it's pretty obvious that she's been shoehorned in to have some significance to the main plot. Her character is pretty pedestrian, her role is very similar to that of a Disney princess in the sense that she's been treated like a child by her parents and has to prove that she can be independent through her choices. But that's all explored with little depth because they decide to give her screen time in the 4th episode when they already established other main characters who we care about more. Who does she think she is? Willem Dafoe in Boondock Saints? Come on. You can never compete with such greatness. The scene revolving around Jace's speech was pretty by the book. The political aspect regarding Mel's character was pretty dull. It's probably down to the way her lines are delivered. It felt very robotic, and the fact that she acted like any typical politician would made her all the less interesting. Also, Jace's character was a lot less likeable. You would think he would be wiser after years of experience and investing in Piltover, but it made him more clueless and ignorant, which was very frustrating to see since he is one of the main characters. Oh, you think you're so cool playing that music to that even cooler cliffhanger.
Who the hell are you?
We get a backstory of Caitlyn's childhood, and I couldn't care less about this. This really depicted Piltover as a very virtuous and unsoiled city, yet not having any noticeable features is what made Piltover and its inhabitants so dull. Being rich isn't a character trait. There's a really cool sequence where Vi leads Caitlyn into the Undercity. The animation is deft and glorious to gaze upon. It captured the environment in a way that matched Vi's personality. It was a neat way of saying welcome to my world. Every time they cut from the Undercity to Piltover, there's a significant drop in quality and entertainment. The politics in this show do have the opportunity to be as arresting as the action, but the way it's drawn out is just tiring to listen to. Apparently Jace has made enemies with corrupt council members after heightening the level of security, but this was portrayed with scarce layers. It was a scene that had no real build-up or investment. We were supposed to feel worried for Jace. Oh, however will he get himself out of this predicament? He's up against 2 councillors. He's in the endgame now. You could really tell how concerned he was about this. And what the hell is this? These 2 councillors are seen as idiots in every scene. It would have been a better twist if we knew more about them from their first appearance back in episode 2.
When my back is to the world, that was smiling when I turned.
Why is this happening? This is just wasting time. The episode didn't even need to be this long if Imagine Dragons weren't desperate for a gig. Victor's backstory is one of great fascination. I feel like he should have been the main focus out of the characters in Piltover, as opposed to Jace and Caitlyn. You could really resonate with his struggles, and that certainly made me want to see him succeed all the more.
I didn't know you were an artist.
Oh, you're so relatable. What's that? You're in exile. Well, life has certainly treated you hard.
I hate feeling so useless.
Well, you are. Jace's conflict with Heimerdinger that resulted in the council voting him into retirement added a tweak of flavour to what had been a pretty gloomy affair of political scheming. Caitlyn and Vi's dynamic was also fairly good. In fact, there wasn't many problems with episode 6. There was an escalating tension within all the storylines. I'm beginning to wonder why I made this video in the first place. Nope. I strongly remember why I made this video. Whose idea was it to use that song? It was so out of place. But yeah, the final scene was great. You understood the pain that Vi and Powder had gone through, and Caitlyn's presence came to fruition by casting a far greater barrier between Vi and Powder's relationship. In the 3rd act we see a grown-up Echo who's revealed to be one of the masked hoverboard thugs. Vi and Echo reconcile and he shows her the secret sanctuary hideout. Not a convenient plot point at all. I didn't see the point in this. It didn't really add anything to the story. I might be wrong though. I just found this scene really ridiculous and cliched. Victor's character certainly grew on me more in this episode. His ties with both the Undercity and the Topsiders added a profound layer of investment in his survival. His rational way of thinking and connections to Zaun would have made a far more fitting role for the council. The loss of trust between Victor and Jace mixed with Mel's persuasive control of Jace heightened the intensity surrounding the fate of the 2 cities' inevitable taste of war, though I found myself having little interest in the fate of Jace and Mel as their goals did not suffice with the same level of intrigue as Victor's arc. Jinx's struggles to battle with what appears to be along the lines of schizophrenia didn't actually make me feel pity for her. There was a violent tendency in her nature and lack of compassion to life, but they don't really spend enough time to know why she's like this. It's very much glossed over when Silco reminds Jinx of how she ended up where she did. I felt that one scene of dialogue wasn't enough to warrant her drastic change. Having skipped several years from Act 1 to Act 2 didn't really help, but there weren't many scenes involving her and Silco to understand how demented their relationship was. Having said that, I thought Silco's scene with the other wealthy chem barons made him a lot more intimidating as a villain, but it would have been a lot cooler if I knew who the hell these people were. What is this man's fashion sense? That weird elf thing dresses better. The scene at the bridge was not particularly great because it was Caitlin who was in danger, so I didn't really care as much. What a coincidence that Marcus and the rest of the enforcers died in that explosion, but Caitlin and Echo are just fine. The brief but slick fight between Echo and Jinx was the highlight of the episode, so we now get a backstory of Mel. Why are they trying to develop the worst characters so much? No one cares about your childhood, it's pretentious and uninspiring. The only interesting part was the features of the outside world, such as the culture and the kingdoms. I found the scheming in the Undercity of Zaan to be a lot more engaging than that of the politics in Piltover. Maybe because crime laws typically have better character development, which is what makes audiences so attracted to crime dramas. I was a little confused with Mel's thinking. In the previous episode, she suggested to Jace that they use the Hextech as weapons to prepare for war against the Undercity. But when talking to her mother, Ambessa, she proudly claims that war is far from the first thing on her mind when confronted with rebellions. Sometimes I think Arcane follows tropes from other successful films and shows. I mean, this was just a straight up rip-off of Joker. I felt that it also forced me to feel like a scene was supposed to be full of tension without allowing me to decide for myself. The formulaic dialogue and ever-foreboding music didn't help in this case. Vi and Jace form a temporary alliance to take down Silco. The action here was just numbing to watch. I didn't like the song being played, and when Jace killed that kid I felt nothing. Not because I have no empathy for humanity, I just found this scene more funny than tragic. Oh, I'm not really helping myself here. So Jace mourns over the kid he killed, whereas I'm grieving for his half-baked character development, and Victor also mourns over the death of Skye. This would have seemed a lot more impactful if I actually knew anything about his romantic subplot, but to be honest, there haven't been many moments where I felt a genuine emotional attachment to the characters. The scene with Heimerdinger and Echo was just a waste of time once more, another reason as to why these episodes need to be shortened down. After 9 episodes, I've come to the conclusion that the Council are useless with the exception of Jace and Mel, since they actually offer different opinions to improve their city. So we now get to the gritty part of the show, the famous dinner table scene. Now, if you're as salty and hollow as me, then we would both agree that you could skip the first 20 minutes of this episode, because that pales in comparison to the last half. This whole sequence was extremely entertaining. The stakes were at its highest point, and quite frankly would have worked if the storyline in Piltover were exempt from the show. If we just focused on Vi and Powder's storyline and kept everything from the perspective of the Undercity, the spirit and feel of Arcane would have been far more intense and heartbreaking. The political aspects are what ruined the show, or at least made a lot weaker. We got an even deeper level of endearment between Silco and Jinx before he died. This whole sequence would have been an incredibly satisfying payoff if the story remained intact with Vi and Powder. Sometimes there are 1-hour shows that have far too many plot points and characters that don't actually find any satisfying conclusion towards the finale. Not gonna mention any particular show. I fear that Arcane will suffer from this too, because eventually there will come a point where the storylines will merge into one. And if that doesn't happen, then you would have wasted many seasons plodding on with no resolute or logical conclusion because of how convoluted the story has grown. Overall, you're probably thinking I'm just hating on this show. I don't think it's bad at all. It just doesn't warrant the same level of acclaim as Game of Thrones or The Last Airbender. It's a few bars down. I have my problems with the show, but it can be enjoyed.